Welcome to the If You Could See Me podcast. Thank you for joining the movement. I'm your host, Erin Mahone. I'm an author, storyteller, facilitator, and mental health professional. I like to talk about big things, ask difficult questions, and challenge the ways in which we perceive ourselves, one another, and what's possible in the world. On this podcast, I speak to thinkers, makers, feelers, and folks fighting for change. You'll experience entertaining, thought-provoking conversations with people from all walks of life. I believe that mental health is health, and it goes so far beyond conversations about illness, medications, and treatment. Our mental health is essential to living our best lives, and I want to live in a world in which we talk about emotional wellness as easily and frequently as talking about the common cold. We aren't there yet, but I believe we can be. When I set out to create this thing, I had no idea what I was doing. Just that I wanted to share my story and I hoped I wasn't alone. I've discovered that so many people need to find solidarity. They need to know they aren't alone. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. We can have these difficult conversations in the light of day. We can laugh, joke, and get serious about making change. I've tried to create multiple entry points within this movement, and I hope you will take some time to check out all of our resources and consider sharing your story on our website, ifyoucouldseeme.com. There you can submit your story, find mental health resources, submit ideas or resources yourself, read the stories of other brave warriors, find out about future live events, and invite me to speak or give a workshop in your area. If you're inspired by what we're doing, I hope you'll consider helping out by visiting our Patreon page, patreon.com/ifyoucouldseeme, purchasing my book, rating and reviewing this podcast on iTunes to help people find us, or just send me a message to let me know how this project is impacting you, ways we can improve, and future podcast or blog topics. This was only an idea until amazing people like you joined me in bringing it to life. Enjoy the show. Hello, friends and family, and welcome to another episode of the If You Could See Me podcast. I am Erin Mahone. I am so excited to be here with you. We are in the last few days before Christmas 2018. The year is coming to an end, and what a year it has been. 2018 is one for the history books in my life. I am so excited and honored today to get to introduce you, my wonderful audience, to one of the participants in the next If You Could See Me project event. Her name is Miss Sarah McFarland. She is the executive director and founder of the Learning and Integrating New Knowledge and Skills Center, also known as the LINK Center, here in the Richmond, Virginia area. And Sarah, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you for the invite.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your business and what motivated you to start the center, and we can just sort of go from there.
Okay. What motivated me to start the center is back in 2005, my daughter began having her first episodes of mental illness symptoms. And it was a very difficult process for me and my sons at that time. We had very little support, no education, and didn't know where to go for resources. So as her treatment began and our family started to develop some skills and some tools and started this recovery process, I promised myself that I would try to be for someone else what I didn't have. So that's where that came from.
That is
just wanting to provide some services for families who may not know where to go.
Right.
So how did you learn how to do that? What did you draw from? I mean, I think that so often we get overwhelmed in those moments, and all we can think about is, putting one foot in front of the other. Can you talk a little bit about, what internal motivator you had to give you the will to want to do that for other people?
Well, the one thing was I knew that I had to be there for her, regardless of what was going on. I needed to give her her best chance. At the time, she was only 14. So I started asking people at work. I was working at a behavioral health center at the time. So that was really great because I had a lot of people that were around me that had lived through substance abuse and were in recovery, and some of them were dual diagnosed. So that was the first time that I actually had personal experience, even though I was working in the field. So I was more on the substance abuse side, but when my daughter got the diagnosis, I started talking more to coworkers, admin, about where I could go to get resources for myself. And that was a long process because the first thing I learned as a parent was you are in the center of all the chaos that's going on. I did not know that as a parent. When my daughter first went to the doctors and they said to me, you have to go see a counselor, and then she had to go see a psychiatrist. She started to have some behavioral issues. The police were involved, so we started having to deal with the juvenile justice system. And there was a couple of stays at the hospital. In the midst of all of that, I was under the impression that all of these people worked together. Silly me.
Right.
Yeah, none of these people worked together. You were really fortunate if someone knew someone at the police department that actually knew someone that worked for the Department of Social Services. That was really the only connection, that if there was a person whose name just kept coming across the paperwork and they knew to tell you to go to that person. Outside of that, you were the person who had to make sure that you were advocating for your child. This is what I need. This is what's going on. This is what I need to happen. And I did not know that. And I'm sure there are a lot of parents that are going through it right now that don't know that it's you. You're at the center of this with your child. And none of those connecting agencies, none of these people that are involved in the system of care are connected to each other. And that was a bitter pill to swallow because I thought that I would get more support than I actually did.
It's so true that, we operate in such a deeply disconnected and broken system. And parents often have to be, parent and therapist and case manager and, and all of those things. And so often they have no skills in those areas. The fact that you already had some background in the, world of behavioral health and the system, you had a little bit of knowledge, but I can only imagine how stressful and frightening that must have been as a parent. It's one thing to be in that world. It's another thing to be in it as a parent of a child who, you are afraid every day that, that they're slipping away from you.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't know. As you may already know, and most people who are working in this field or have already received a diagnosis, it took years before we got an accurate diagnosis. Right. I mean, it started out with oppositional defiance disorder, then it was depression, then it was anxiety, then it was depression with anxiety, and eventually at age 21, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So trying to understand as you're going through these phases with them, how to manage the behavior that's attached to the diagnosis. Because when she had the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder, there was a lot of defiance. There was rule breaking. There was anger, right. Rage even at some times. And just trying to manage her behavior in the household so that it would not cause a problem outside of the household. because like I said, there was a time when the police were involved because she would break curfew.
Right.
And then it was like, okay, you can't just keep breaking curfew, and one of the things that happens, and I'm going to be very transparent here, and I hope that this is able to help someone.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with the behaviors, you get to a point where when law enforcement is involved, that you do want them to go because you want a breather, especially when you have other children. And your other children are starting to say to you, look, you spend all your time with her. I rarely get to spend any time with you. She's always misbehaving. When she does something right, she's rewarded, and she's just doing what she's supposed to do.
Right.
So it was a very difficult time trying to manage. And I know that sometimes parents do feel like, okay, at least if they're detained, or at least if they're in the hospital, I can try to get my bearings together. And I felt that way a lot in those first 2 years.
So that was such a long road for you. I want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about, which, I mean, you kind of naturally did that, the impact of this on you and how, dealing with a child's, mental health challenges and juggling all those balls and managing the household and parenting the children. When you get a chance to breathe, what does that look like? How do you function as a person in the midst of all of that?
Back
or
then,
do you?
Well, it was a learning process because I've always been a person who, just kind of stayed to myself. And that, on top of journaling became a tool that I was able to use that was really beneficial to me. It didn't cost anything, and I didn't have to go anywhere to do it. So it worked really well for me. I had a couple of friends that were able to support me. I'm a coffee lover, so a lot of times what I know now is self-care. We would go get coffee or just spend time just, sharing what was going on in my life. But it took a while to get there because at first I was ashamed. I felt guilty. Guilt was probably the first thing. And then there was the shame. And it took, like I said, those first 2 years of having to work through those two emotions and getting to a place where I realized that nothing that I did was a result of her having a chemical imbalance.
Right.
Because at first that's what I thought. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I was too strict. Maybe I put too much pressure on her because she's the first child. There was a lot of things that were going on in my head, but I came to understand later by trying to educate myself and educate my boys that there was nothing that I could have done to stop what happened, but I can do some things to help modify her behavior, which is what we started trying to work on. And then once her behavior got better, then I was able to have more coffee and do more journaling because, before that it was like, oh God, I can't even sleep, let alone have coffee.
Right. We tend to, as parents, not only, take on all the roles and responsibilities and, and the job of being the parent, we also tend to take on all of the blame and the guilt and the weight of that and say, if only I had done things differently, if only I had been a different kind of, parent support system, disciplinarian, things might be different. And as you say, it's so true that, you can raise a whole family full of children and, everybody turns out differently. And, some of it has to do with what you've done. And a lot of it has to do with, the way that people are just built. And it becomes easier, I think, to meet those needs and to parent the children when we recognize that they need what they need from us, and when we can show up to them for them rather than about us, it really does kind of change the whole dynamic.
Right. And that process came from me because during those first 2 years, what ended up happening in my personal life with me is some of my daughter's behavior began to trigger some childhood memories and some things that had happened in my life. So there was a period of depression that I went through because I felt angry. I felt alone. I don't think I was ever scared because I knew I was capable of making it through. I just couldn't figure out how. You know, where do I get some tools and how do I deal with her behavior and address my needs too, because there was a lot of trauma in my childhood. So a lot of things my children were not exposed to because I worked really hard to make sure that they didn't. But then when my daughter started having behaviors, it mimicked a lot of the behaviors that I grew up around. When she was kicking the doors and throwing things across the room and just, you know, being violent towards her brothers and arguing and just rebelling, it was an experience that I did not want to have because I had grown up in an environment like that from the age of, you know, infancy to probably 14, seeing a lot of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, addiction, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. I was overwhelmed because I knew I had to be there for my kid. But at the same time, my kid was now mimicking behaviors of people I had disassociated myself with. And I found myself having to contact some of those people to say, hey, can you possibly help me understand what's going on with her? Because I don't know, and I'm really angry. And I need to fix this before she's accountable for her actions. Right now, she's a child, and there's minimal consequences for her behavior right now because her behavior had not escalated to the point that it wasn't just breaking curfew or talking back and not wanting to come in the house when the police came. I was afraid that her behavior would start to mimic my uncle's, which was extreme violence. So, yeah.
And when you reached out, I'm curious, when you reached out to those folks that you had, you know, worked so hard to distance yourself from, what was the response that they gave you?
One of them, he was in really active addiction at the time. He was doing a lot of alcohol, and I think there was some marijuana use also tied in there. He had just come back from Vietnam. So he was trying to express to me that a lot of his behavior came from just rage from not being able to change his surroundings. And maybe she was upset because of some things that had happened. Some of that was true. There was some issues with me and her dad being divorced. But the other part, he really could not help me understand. So it gave me some tools, you know, some things to ask her to try to prompt some responses from her about how she was feeling and what she was thinking, but it wasn't changing her behavior.
I'm so interested. I think that, you know, especially in situations where people, you know, escape trauma and do go to the lengths that you went to, you know, remove yourself from that situation. Oftentimes, you know, the last thing a person wants to do or will do is to contact the people that they've, you know, distanced themselves from. And that must have been very difficult for you emotionally to do that. Do you feel like your family members were responsive to conversations about mental illness? And you know, at that point, were they more self-reflective? I mean, it sounds like the one uncle was a little bit more reflective of, you know, himself and his previous behavior, but did you find that others were as well?
They all pretty much have the same mindset. there is no real conversation about mental health or mental illness. They reject that because I think of the culture of being African American. I think they think that is a sign of weakness. I've had conversations with some family members that feel like I'm just strong and whatever is going on, I have to remain strong or muster up some strength to overcome this. But as a family on a whole, there is no acknowledgement that there is mental illness there, even though as the years have passed by and I've had to go back to contact some people against my will, I will say that it is not easy. I am still disconnected from a lot of my family members, and it's so complex for me. The childhood connection that I have, and I'll share part of my story. I grew up in a household with 5 uncles who were raised as my brothers and an aunt. My mom had already left, and my aunt had left by the time I was 5 years old. So there were 3 remaining uncles in the house by that time. From the ages of 0 to maybe 8, my uncles were my primary caregivers, as well as my grandmother. They're the ones who taught me how to tie my shoes. They're the ones who walked me to school. They're the ones who ironed my clothes, prepared my meals, helped me recite my alphabet, ride a bike, all of those things that a parent is supposed to do. But my mom was absent and my father was absent. So as the years went on and some of that abuse started to escalate, I didn't see any difference in my childhood because I just went on through the process like any other kid. When I became an adult, I still didn't recognize that I had developed certain characteristics as a result of being exposed to childhood trauma. It wasn't until my daughter started to have, like I said, certain behaviors that I had to revisit those things and recognize that this is why I do this. This is why I never allowed my children to go here. This is why I don't drink alcohol to this day. This is why I don't like to be in large crowds. This is why, I'm startled if someone drops a pan in the kitchen. Those are things that I never really paid attention to before. That was just my normal behavior, and that was just the way I was until her diagnosis and her behaviors came along. Then I realized that I, too, had some issues that were a result of that childhood trauma that I was exposed to for more than a decade.
So in so many instances, Sarah, I just think you're so remarkable. You're so self-aware. You're so humble and just incredible in every way. And I'm so proud to have you as part of this project. I admire you so greatly because so many people find themselves I admire you on many levels, but in this particular area, so many people find themselves in this sort of parent caregiver role, and while they may recognize, the things that bubble up in addressing their child's issues, so many, use the child as the sort of conduit for all the things, and they don't take that opportunity for many reasons. It's not a blame, it's just an observation, to look at themselves and to try and heal their own pain and their own struggle. And so I'm curious, now that you are, in this place of, you are an advocate, but you are also, sharing your own personal story and writing and participating in our project. What gave you the desire and the strength and the motivation to start, talking about these things out loud? It doesn't sound like you have a support network as far as family is concerned that is really, enthusiastically cheering you on about talking about your child trauma. So tell the folks at home, how did this happen for you?
During the process of trying to meet the need of the people that I knew I once was, that mom who had a child with a diagnosis with 2 other children. When I decided that I would start the nonprofit, before then, when the idea first presented itself, I knew that I needed more education. And in looking for different education for myself and for my sons, I came across NAMI. And as a result of me participating in some of the training programs with NAMI, once I got that education, that was it. And then there was that peer component. I met a lot of wonderful people who were sharing the same experience that I was having with my daughter, who had some of the same feelings that I had had about my childhood experiences, trying to be supportive of your children, the ones that are diagnosed and the ones that don't have a diagnosis. Because that was, let me say that before I go further. That is probably one of the things that's been most important for me, that my children stayed connected throughout this diagnosis and this whole recovery process for my daughter. I wanted my sons to be able to support her and to have empathy for her, because I saw early on that it could have went one of 2 ways.
Right.
Because I was around a lot of people who had children and the children were already disconnected. I think because my children had a solid foundation of closeness and they love each other, they were able to still empathize with what my daughter was going through at the time. So that was probably the most important thing for me, other than getting her treatment, making sure that she stayed connected. Because my concern was, the conversation we just had about my family and being disconnected. I had to maintain connection with her and my sons, because I knew if something was to happen to me, they would have to support her, because my external family would not be there. So that was one of the motivating factors. And like I said, when I went and I found NAMI and I was able to get educated with their family-to-family program and a couple of other programs that they have that I now facilitate. I'm also now a board member at NAMI. So it's been, just great having that peer community there to support me in the absence of my own family. That has been probably the most help that I've had as far as support and making the connection with people who understand and identify with what's going on with me and what's going on with my daughter.
So how is your daughter today?
She's still struggling. She has been able to maintain a job. She maintains a car, a household. She has 2 wonderful daughters, but she still struggles with not taking medication, even though she has been encouraged to by doctors and myself to take medication to help with the imbalance, because when there is an episode, there's usually violence that comes with it. So trying to get her to accept that maybe what you're doing is good, but it's not enough to help you live a balanced life without medication.
And that's so challenging as a parent, as a loved one, as a family member, to see someone that you love and that you have worked so hard to support, doing so many things that are good and that are solid and that are healthy, but just not being willing to do that one thing that would likely make a huge difference in creating that balance that you so desperately want for them to achieve.
Right.
So how do you as a mother of sons, I'm always curious about how the differences. I too am a mother of a daughter and 2 sons, and we live in a very interesting age where men and women are sometimes I worry that by raising an empowered daughter, I have to somehow, put my sons in a marginalized place, and obviously I don't want to do that. So I struggle a little bit with how to empower sons and daughters without sort of pitting them against one another, as men and women in our culture. And I find that to be sort of a complicated issue. Your kids are a little older than mine are, so from one mom to another, how have you raised sons who have a compassionate understanding of mental health, and how have you talked to them about that?
I think, like I said before, there were certain things that I already was doing that I did not realize were characteristics of my childhood trauma. Mm-hmm. So talking to my boys about things that I had experienced in my childhood, so that they wouldn't feel like I was trying to keep them just isolated and, not away from fun and things like that. Right. Just that I had certain fears of things would happen and get out of control. So telling them very early on that you don't raise your voice at your sister. You can't hit your sister. Mm-hmm. If you're angry, you're going to have to learn how to communicate with her. And we were very active in different religious practices, at different times. So just trying to help them be compassionate people, in general, in the world that they live in, and have love for their fellow man. It was pretty easy. They seem to come out of the womb caring for people. So I'm grateful for that. And they both wanted to understand better, and they still do want to understand mental health better now as adults. I think when they were children, they just wanted to understand why she was behaving the way she was behaving. Right. But now that they're both adult men with their own struggles, they're both in the military, and they both have some challenges now as a result of some of the things that have happened since they've been in the military. Mm-hmm. Just wanting to learn all they can about how the brain works and why this happens. And if you're in particular situations that cause trauma, how can you work on developing some resiliency, so that you're not overtaken in whatever that has taken place.
The word that comes to mind when I think about you as a person, other than just you just make me calm, which is a lot because I'm relatively high strung, but when I talk to you, I just feel sort of peaceful. There's this sort of peace that just washes over me, but I feel like you are such an intentional person. Like, you are very thoughtful about all the different aspects of your life, and you're very conscious of your behavior and your decisions. And it's just fascinating to me to know the kind of general chaos that you were exposed to as a child, to know that you grew up into, obviously a person who did a lot of work on herself, but you are this sort of very contained, very conscious, very intentional being. And I'm curious if that is something that you are aware of about yourself, or if it's just the way you've always been.
It's the way I've always been, but I think it was always intentional without me knowing that it was intentional. Right. I've always known, like I said, I was exposed to a lot of things very early on. And I guess there was just this thing in me that knew that what I was seeing was not the way it was supposed to be. As a child. That's the best way I can describe it. I knew that people were not supposed to drink until they can't stand up or until they're throwing up. I knew that people were not supposed to argue and then hit each other. I knew that husbands and wives were not supposed to cut and shoot each other, but those were things that were going on around me. And I knew based on that I wanted to do something different. So the intentional part was to not duplicate those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bright side of the tragedy is in the addiction, I developed caretaker characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
So out of that chaos and that madness, they created a very loving person. And for that, I am grateful that is what evolved in me. I often have the conversation with people about nurture versus nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is this how I was born, or is this something that was developed in me as a result of the things that I've seen? And I still haven't come up with an answer for that.
I think it's both. That's one of those, you know, there's got to be a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. But I do want to say this to you. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be able to participate in this project, because I think there are a lot of people that have lived through similar situations that I've lived through in the African American community, that when they're with their friends or their peers, they may feel like I can share this little bit of this, you know, because I need some relief, or because I need some input, or maybe just because they're tired of holding it.
Yeah.
I want to be able to use that platform to say to people that you're not alone in this. You know, there are people that support you and that will encourage you and be there, you know, throughout this journey, because it is a journey. And there are resources to get help. Like I said, NAMI was a great resource for me, and there are some other agencies that I went through also to get education. I started working with the juvenile justice system, the Department of Social Services, and I would really like to be able to work with the school system to get more parents involved in getting the training and supporting the schools by just providing these services for free.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have enough counselors in schools. And a lot of times, particularly in the African American community, we're told what stays in the house, what goes on in the house stays in the house.
Right.
But even if a child is experiencing abuse, neglect, you know, even if it's, you know, they're hungry and there's no food, they're afraid to share because of the consequences they feel like they'll have to deal with at home. But if we can get to a place by educating people that we're not trying to harm you by helping your child,
Right.
Let's just help the whole unit. And that's what my goal is with our nonprofit, to help the whole family. No one is blaming you because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of things that I didn't know, and I've learned along the way. So once you get the education and you get the support and you're encouraged to do better, I really believe that people can and will do better. As a parent, you know, a lot of times when you're struggling with your child and they have different behaviors, people want you to abandon them. They want you to give up on your child, you know, because it's not something that they're experiencing. I need parents to understand you're not alone in that. You know, you have support. You know, there are different avenues that you can, you know, connect with to feel supported in those situations, because it can be overwhelming when you feel like, I love this kid, it's my kid.
Right. I don't know where to turn. I don't, you know, my family doesn't understand what's going on. I don't know where the information is. And, you know, when you talk about this stuff, the thing that comes to mind that, you know, that often comes to mind, which is why this has now become the sort of mantra of the project. And that is, you know, it's not my job to stay quiet so that you can stay comfortable. The idea that sometimes we have to say what's true about our experience, about the pain that we've experienced, about the uncertainty that we feel, so that we can get the help that we need, or that our families need, or, you know, so that we can get from where we are to where we want to be. And sometimes that means we have to say things out loud that the people in our lives would rather we didn't.
Right. And that is a bitter pill to swallow too, because when you have been raised in a situation like mine, where your caretakers were also your abusers, you sometimes don't want to reconnect. But at the same time, there are situations like when my daughter was acting out, I had to find out what was going on with the other people to see if maybe they could help me solve my problem with my daughter. And like I said, being able to share on your platform has helped me so much, because I've had to revisit a lot of things and assess a lot of things about myself and take an inventory of what I'm willing to do to get better in my recovery, because there are some things that I still have to work on. For me first, I'm really good at trying to support other people and help other people get what they need and do what they have to do to get better. But doing this has given me another avenue, another platform to do something for myself. And it's started healing a lot of things within myself, to acknowledge that, hey, this is why I do this, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to try to create a different set of behaviors to connect with this thing that I used to do, or this thing that happened to me. And it's really just been wonderful, to sit back and think that out of all the tragedy that I experienced as a child, I don't know if I've shared this openly with you before, but my aunt was 18 years older than me. She was the only person that is in my family that I was connected to from 0 to 17 that did not do anything to harm me or cause me any pain. When I was 17 years old, her husband murdered her.
Oh my God.
And she was a great source of my resilience. She is the person who loved me, hugged me, kissed me, told me that I was wonderful, that I was beautiful, that she would be there for me. And to the best of her ability, she tried.
Right.
But because of things that happened in her childhood that I am not aware of, she chose the person that she chose, and it ultimately ended her life. So I said all that to say this: having this opportunity to share has not just made me relive the loss of her, but the joy of having her.
Oh.
And that's what I reflect on, that I had her for 17 wonderful years, and that I never had an ill moment, a heartbreaking moment, any letdown, any disappointment from her. She was everything that I needed.
Almost speechless. I'm never completely speechless, but there's no better gift than that I could have than to hear you say that. But I have to say that, resilience to me, the human capacity for survival is a magnificent function. And some people are born with more resiliency than others. But I do believe that for a child to have one person in their life, like your aunt, like my grandmother for me, who truly sees them and shows them how the world should be toward them, is the key to becoming a person who can overcome great tragedy and make their way, in a healthy way through their trauma. I am so deeply sorry for that loss for you in your life, that you would have such a beautiful role model and to lose her so early and in such a violent way. But I am also so moved by your capacity to be able to see and say what you just said about, yes, you had this loss, but how grateful you were to be able to have her. That is just such a magnificent tribute to the work that we're trying to do. We are, as caregivers, so often, it is so much easier for us to give to and support and help others. What I have realized through this process is that, I can use this as a tool to heal myself and then give that gift of healing to other people. And I feel like that's what you're doing. We need to be having these conversations about mental health and about trauma and about resiliency and about prevention and about all of these things in every community. And every community has its own way of dealing with and addressing these issues in healthy ways and unhealthy ways. I am not an African American person, and therefore I don't feel that it is my comfort or my right to go into someone's cultural environment and say this is the way you should be doing things. But what I do feel is my duty, is my role, is my obligation, and my privilege is to be able to invite people from all different walks of life into this platform to be able to share their own experiences, because together we can make the change that we need to make. And so, I'm so honored and excited and just gifted by the universe to get to share this platform with you. Thank you so much. We're not done.
Yeah, it's been a joy. Like I said, this has been a gift to myself to continue to heal. Sometimes I think you kind of play around in your mind about things that you would like to do when you see people on TV acting or singing. And I used to always want to be in a band, the female lead, but I can't sing. So this, has been like, oh, you're going to be able to talk to some people. And it's like, well, what are you going to talk about? So being able to push myself to try new things and be exposed to different things, has really been a growth process. And, like I said, there was some pain in the beginning because I had to relive some things. But, as I get closer to the date of sharing, I'm starting to feel more and more joy about what I'm doing and for the opportunity to be able to do it, because not only, being from a culture of people who have significant struggles, but being demographically from a community that struggles as well. I grew up in a town that only has one traffic light.
Wow.
And in 2018, they still only have one traffic light. So there are a lot of people there who need help, but they're not really receptive of people they don't know.
Right.
So I have to use my voice to be able to go back and say, hey, I'm one of you. You know me. You knew my granddad. You knew who my grandmother was. Let me tell you what you can try to incorporate into your life to make this situation better. And
this is what's it's possible. Healing is possible.
Yeah. And I know because I'm an example.
You are.
It's just been great.
You're such an example. Before we tie up all of the loose ends and go about our day, it's a few days before Christmas. Is there a place where folks can find you? Can you tell us about a website, online presence? Tell us where we can find your center and how people can reach out to you if they are in need of the kind of support and assistance that you are providing.
They can find me at ssmoot at the Link Center, inc.org. That is my direct email. And I'm also located in Petersburg at the Hope Center. It's at 827 Commerce Street. It's much easier to reach me by email, and then I'll follow up and set up an appointment to discuss whatever's going on. But like I said, we primarily help families with education, training, and advocacy. All of the trainings are free. We can do these trainings at churches, which is a place that I love to go to because, especially in the Black community, that is kind of like our therapy.
Right.
We can set up small support groups, at someone's home if they feel comfortable doing that, or at a neutral place if they just want a couple of people to get together to be able to share, to start the process. Because what I've learned is once you start talking about it, the more you want to talk about it and the more education you get.
Are opened.
Yeah. So that's how they can reach me. I'm just, like I said, I'm really excited about what you're doing and how it's affecting people with this lived experience and people who have such complex stories like mine. It's not just my daughter's illness, but my illness, my childhood trauma, and how it affects everybody that's connected to us, and helping them to understand why we do what we do in the manner that we do it.
I think that, the big thing that I always say, that folks probably get tired of hearing, but to me, it's sort of the crux of the entire issue, is that when we understand ourselves and when we can find peace with our own stories and our own experiences, and we can learn that self-compassion that is so integral to the healing process, then it extends out into the world, and we can, then we are more compassionate with other people. We have a better understanding of their circumstances and experiences, and it becomes this sort of cycle of acceptance, and that's how we make change. That's how we improve circumstances. But it starts with that general sense of cutting ourselves slack and trying to understand who we are. And you seem to have come to that in a very natural way, but not everybody does. And so that's why it is so important for you and for me and for all of us to be out there saying these things and giving people permission to ask those questions and to look inside themselves and to start kind of mining their life experiences and their choices so that they can make change within themselves, and then have that multi-generational change. We can be unhealthy from generation to generation, or we can become healthier from generation to generation, but we have to know that that's an option. And so I just admire you so much for your commitment to this work and for your courage to be able to come and join us on this platform as well. And I'm just so excited to continue working with you beyond this project and, remain connected so that we can work together to make this a better world, better community, a safer place for folks with trauma and mental health issues.
Well, thank you again. I'm just really grateful that you're there. There are so many people that are looking for that beam of light. And I think the brighter your light gets by people being connected to you, the more people you're going to be able to help. It is, an overwhelming experience in a wonderful way to have you there. So again, thank you for using your voice to echo in the wind for me, because I didn't meet you directly. I heard you through someone else. And it's just been wonderful that, like I said, that you're there and that people can find you and that you do give everyone an opportunity to take a place at the table if they want.
Everybody's voice has a right to be heard. And I just am grateful to get to do it. Sarah, thank you so much. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I can't wait to see you. Oh, I'm going to see you again tomorrow, aren't I?
Yes, you'll see me tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you so much, Erin. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.